I'm Nima Rajan. The federal government released a financial update today. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland delivered the update virtually after 2 of her staffers tested positive for COVID-19. The update contained billions in spending, including a response to the Omicron variant. Some other measures included targeting immigration backlogs, disaster assistance for BC, and rebates for small and medium businesses. Pfizer says full results of a 2,250-person study confirms its experimental COVID-19 pill appears to be effective against the Omicron variant. The company says the drug reduced combined hospitalizations and deaths by about 89%. This was among high-risk adults when taken shortly after initial COVID-19 symptoms. Earlier this month, the federal government announced it is buying up to 1.5 million courses of antiviral pills from Pfizer and Merck. However, neither one has yet been approved by Health Canada. Data from the First Nations Health Authority in BC says Indigenous people are 5 times more likely to experience an overdose and 3 times more likely to die than other residents. Dr. Nell Wyman, Deputy Medical Officer for the authority, says the pandemic restricted mental health resources and closed borders. This limited the illicit drug supply and resulted in higher concentrations of the opioid fentanyl. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald says the pandemic also prevented traditional and communal grieving processes, which has added to the collective trauma of Indigenous people. She says there is a direct line between trauma and the increase in addiction rates within First Nations communities. Members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees have ratified a new collective agreement with the province. The public sector union, representing about 22,000 direct government workers, says of those eligible to cast ballots, 91% voted in favor of the deal. The 4-year agreement includes employment security and wage hikes in years 3 and 4. Manitoba is asking for help staffing its crammed hospital and intensive care units. The provincial health department is asking the federal government to provide up to 30 nurses for 6 weeks. This comes as Manitoba struggles with another surge in COVID-19 cases. 10 doctors wrote to the province over the weekend asking for military help. They warn ICUs are close to being overwhelmed like they were last spring when dozens of patients had to be flown to other provinces for care. Ontario's top doctor says it would be prudent and reasonable to assume every new case of COVID-19 in the province involves the Omicron variant. Dr. Kieran Moore says the new, highly transmissible variant is expected to make up to 100% of the province's case count by the end of the month. Meanwhile, Ontario is ramping up COVID-19 testing in long-term care homes and tightening restrictions on visitors and resident activities. This is to guard against the Omicron variant. Lion Electric says it has received a conditional order for 200 all-electric school buses from a company based in southwestern Ontario. Financial terms of the deal with Lang's Bus Lines were not immediately available. The order for the Lion C buses is conditional on a grant under the federal government's Zero Emission Transit Fund. Deliveries are set to begin gradually in 2022. The federal government has announced added support for PEI potato farmers due to an exportation ban on their spuds. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says farmers who did not get enrolled in this year's agri-stability program will be allowed to sign up. The agency issued a statement saying Ottawa and the PEI government have also agreed to increase interim payments from the program. Canada suspended all shipments of fresh potatoes from PEI to the U.S. late last month. This was after fungal potato wart was discovered in 2 fields in the province. CP Rail has completed its acquisition of the American Railway Kansas City Southern. It has placed its shares of the KCS in a voting trust. This while the U.S. Surface Transportation Board reviews the $31 billion deal, which is a process it expects will be completed in next year's 4th quarter. CP says its takeover of KCS will create the only single-line railroad linking Canada, the United States, and Mexico. The Canadian Press news story of the year is the discovery of unmarked graves at a former residential school in British Columbia's interior. It came ahead of Canada's COVID-19 vaccine rollout and stories about climate change and severe weather in BC. These were all part of the annual survey of editors at media outlets across the country. The story broke in May when the Tikamloops Wet'suwet'en Nation in Kamloops announced ground-penetrating radar found what were believed to be the remains of up to 215 children. We'll be right back after the break with a deeper look at the federal budget update that was announced today. An interview with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is up next. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland released the updated accounting of the country's finances today, which shows the deficit is in line to hit $144.5 billion this year. The update included billions in spending, including a response to the Omicron variant. Some other measures included targeting immigration backlogs, disaster assistance for BC, and rebates for small and medium businesses. One new spending measure unveiled yesterday concerns the $40 billion the government has set aside to compensate First Nations children and to undertake long-term reforms to the child welfare system. Well, with us today to talk about the budget update is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
So let's start with a brief overview of today's budget update.
Well, massive amounts of spending, massive deficit, but I think the two key takeaways for your audience here is number one, somehow Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is going to be outspending her last big spending budget. And number two is that debt interest costs are going to cost taxpayers about $200 billion by 2027. And
what were the major targets of today's budget update?
Well, the deficit is $144.5 billion. That's a massive deficit. It's slightly down from the projected one in the budget, but that's not because the government is operating more efficiently. In fact, spending is going up. Why we're seeing the deficit going down is because the government is increasing its tax take.
All right, sir. Well, in terms of the CTF individually, what is your organization looking for in terms of takeaways from today's budget update?
Well, we need the finance minister to come back with a plan to actually find some savings. We have to remember the context here, even before the pandemic, because in 2018, the Trudeau government brought the federal government spending to all-time highs, which means that before the pandemic, the federal government's per-person spending was higher than it was during any single year during World War II.
And are there any measures that you or yourself are looking at more closely?
Well, one of the things that we're very concerned with is how the government is fueling this inflation with its unprecedented amount of spending. By the end of this year, the federal government's debt is going to reach about $1.2 trillion. So I know many Canadians right now are worried about the increase in cost of living. So Canadians are rightly worried about how we're going to pay for all this borrowed money.
And we know higher oil prices may have helped to create more fiscal space for the budget. So what does that mean for government spending going forward if these higher prices continue?
Well, we continue to see government spending balloon. We continue to see the finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, borrow a bunch of money, spend a bunch of money that we don't have. Now, we want to be seeing the deficit going down, but we want to see the deficit going down by the government finding savings. But we're not seeing that. What we're seeing is the exact opposite. We're seeing spending go up, even above the massive amount of spending that was in the last budget.
And given that this was just a budget update, what is the CTF looking for in the next budget?
We need to see a concrete plan to balance the budget because we have seen years of borrowing, and years of borrowing means taxpayers are losing out on a significant amount of money just in debt interest costs. Let me say just one more time, by 2027, we are going to lose out on nearly $200 billion just on interest charges alone. That money can't go to healthcare. That money can't stay in our pockets because it's going to the bond fund managers on Bay Street.
All right, sir, just over a minute left here, but how can our viewers learn more about how government spending can impact Canadian taxpayers?
Well, first, number one, head over to taxpayer.com, check out our newsroom. But hey, we pick up the phone, call your MP, email your MP, and tell them that it's time to really roll up their sleeves and find some savings in this big budget.
And why would you say it's important for our Canadian viewers to look into this as well?
Well, I mean, right now we're all worried about inflation. Well, Freeland is pouring more fuel onto the inflation fire by spending a bunch of money that we don't have.
All right, sir, just about a minute left here, but tell us a little bit more about the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and the work that your organization does.
Well, we're a nonprofit organization that we've been around for 30 years, pushing for lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability. Please head over to taxpayer.com and take some action. Help us hold these politicians' feet to the fire.
All right, Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Always great having you on Forum Daily, sir. Thank you again for joining us today on the show.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, stay tuned. We will be back after the break with a look at the diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. We'll have an interview with Dr. Robert Barney from Western University, and he's an Olympics expert, so you definitely want to tune in after the break. We'll be right back shortly. The Chinese government's treatment of its Uyghur minority could come before the courts in Argentina at about the same time that the Winter Olympics open on February 4th in Beijing. The case will be brought as a universal jurisdiction criminal complaint in Argentina by lawyers representing China's ethnic Uyghur population. This comes as Canada, along with the UK, Australia, and the US, decided on a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympic Games. They cite human rights concerns, including allegations of genocide against the Muslim Uyghur minority in China's Xinjiang province. But what do these moves mean for the iconic international games that have taken place for hundreds of years? Well, joining us now to give us deeper insight is Dr. Robert K. Barney, professor at Western University and an Olympic Games history expert. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks a lot.
Now, in this diplomatic boycott, international governments are refusing to send any government delegates to the Games. So what roles do these officials play when attending the Olympic Games in the first place?
Well, theirs is mostly a ceremonial role. They'll appear at receptions, few little meetings with government officials and Olympic officials, but they're just there for show. Nothing really takes place between them on a grand scale.
All right, sir. Well, the Chinese government is now under the spotlight for its human rights abuses against its Uyghur minority population and its actions in Hong Kong. So how many countries have joined this diplomatic boycott so far, and what message are they trying to send through this?
Well, we only know about half a dozen right now. The UK, Australia, us and Canada and the United States and Kosovo. A Baltic country is considering it, but that's about the extent of it so far.
And what sort of message do you think this move is sending to the Chinese government?
Well, it's one they're going to largely ignore and press on with business. But it does show the world and shows the Chinese, at least, that the conditions in their country are not being totally not taken care of, not even observed. The world is watching.
All right, sir. And on the other hand, we have the Chinese government saying that this diplomatic boycott is upending the political neutrality of sport. So is this a relevant point within this situation?
Well, it's partially a relevant point, but politics have always played their role in the Olympic Games, including keeping countries out of them. And the one thing that's been learned from these boycotts is that no longer is the world going to tolerate boycotts that sacrifice the athletes' participation in the games. The world wants to see them participate. The corporate sponsorship levels throughout the world want them to participate, and they're going to participate whether there are diplomatic boycotts or not.
All right, sir. And we know this isn't the first time that a diplomatic boycott has been announced for the Olympics. So take us back to when and why these boycotts were implemented previously.
Well, they date back to 1936, when governments were faced with the prospect of going to support the Hitler Games. Canada's government sent them. They wanted the representation there and ignored what was going on in Germany at that time. The U.S. had a very close vote on whether to support the team financially or not the government, but the sporting federation, that the umbrella organization that controlled the Olympic participation. And it was a very narrow vote, over 600 votes cast, and it was practically even. Only three votes deciding in favor of them going or being supported financially. And then in 1980 and 1984, with the tit for tat in the middle of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, the Jimmy Carter government of the United States rallied a huge number of countries, over 60, 65, I believe, to boycott the Moscow Olympics in 1980, including the athletes. But they had a lot of trouble trying to get the athletes and the United States Olympic Committee to agree to support the boycott. And they bludgeoned them with threats of finances that support the Olympic Committee in the United States with withholding those. And the same way with Canada. Canada followed the United States' lead with that, and there was pressure brought by financial interest in sponsored by the government that said we're going to line up behind the United States in this and not go. And then, of course, in 1980, this was 1984. Rather, the Soviets turned around and with the Soviet bloc, the Eastern European countries, but took them all but one, Romania, out of those games in Los Angeles in 1984.
An analysis of data from South Africa shows the Omicron variant appears to cause less severe disease than previous versions of COVID-19. And the Pfizer vaccine seems to offer less defense against infection, but still good protection against hospitalization. The findings are in line with other early data about Omicron's behavior, including that it seems to be more easily transmitted. A 2-dose Pfizer-BioNTech vaccination appears to provide just 33% protection against infection, but 70% protection against hospitalization. Haiti's prime minister has declared 3 days of national mourning. This comes after at least 60 people were killed and dozens injured when a gasoline truck exploded. The blast happened overnight in the city of Cap-Haïtien. A witness reported seeing people scooping up buckets of gasoline from the truck and the street to take back to their houses. Haiti is struggling with a severe shortage of fuel and spiraling gas prices. British lawmakers have proposed tougher rules aimed at cracking down on harmful online content. A committee says there should be rules making it illegal to send unsolicited graphic images and requiring porn sites to ensure children can't gain access. They also want faster action in holding tech executives criminally liable for failing to uphold the regulations. A court in Belarus on Tuesday sentenced the husband of the country's opposition leader to 18 years in prison. The charges against Sergei Tikhonovsky included organizing mass unrest and inciting hatred, and have been widely seen as politically motivated. Mr. Tikhonovsky, a popular video blogger and activist, planned to challenge authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko in the August 2020 presidential election. He was arrested 2 days after declaring his candidacy. His wife, Svetlana Tikhonovskaya, ran in his place, drawing tens of thousands of people in support. Official results of the vote handed President Lukashenko a landslide victory, but were rejected by the opposition and the West as a sham. Ukraine's defense minister says that the former Soviet republic has no plans to attack anyone, and its gathering of troops is purely defensive. In recent weeks, there has been a massive Russian troop buildup near Ukraine's border. This has led to Western diplomatic efforts to prevent an invasion, which the Kremlin has denied it is planning. The United Arab Emirates is suspending talks on a $23 billion deal to purchase American-made F-35 planes, armed drones, and other equipment. The Emirati embassy in Washington said it would suspend discussions with the U.S. However, meetings at the Pentagon this week between the two sides on other matters will move forward as planned. The proposed sale of 50 F-35s to the UAE came at the end of former President Donald Trump's administration. President Joe Biden's administration put the deal on hold after he took office. The U.S. House panel investigating the January 6th insurrection on the U.S. Capitol has voted to pursue contempt charges against former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Lawmakers also revealed a series of frantic text messages that he received as the attack was underway. The messages reveal members of Congress, Fox News anchors, and even former President Donald Trump's own son, Don Jr., were urging Mr. Meadows to push Mr. Trump to act quickly to stop the siege by his supporters. The panel voted 9-0 to recommend the contempt charges to the full House. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has withdrawn his candidacy for a Senate seat in next year's elections. The president did not give a reason for the move, but his spokesman said it would allow the leader to better focus on the COVID-19 pandemic and efforts to ensure peaceful elections. Critics say Mr. Duterte, once out of power, would likely face an array of lawsuits for his deadly anti-drugs crackdown. The World Meteorological Organization confirms the 38 degrees Celsius temperature recorded in a Russian town in June 2020 is the highest temperature ever recorded in the Arctic. The UN agency says the temperature in Verkhoyansk was more befitting of the Mediterranean than the Arctic. The heat wave that stretched north of the Arctic Circle played a key role in forest fires, loss of sea ice, and global temperature increases. These made 2020 one of the 3 hottest years on record. Iraqi singer Sajida Obaid is a unifying figure in Iraq's fractured society. For older Iraqis, the 63-year-old is a symbol of a bygone golden era. To the young, her upbeat love songs and subtly racy lyrics have become a channel for self-expression in a largely conservative society. And regardless of age, her catchy melodies make the audience want to dance. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.